narcissists are naturally drawn towards strong people, successful people, smart people, opinionated people. They want that limelight. It looks good for them to be with someone like that. Where we see the quote weak part come into play is after the years of abuse and literally stripping of that person's identity by a narcissist. Then we have, at the end of the relationship, somebody whose self-esteem, self-identity is just absolutely crushed.
Ever found yourself captivated by charm that later revealed itself as a facade? Well, today we explore narcissistic relationships with psychologist Dr. Jaime Zuckerman. Despite minor internet disruptions, Dr. Zuckerman's brilliant insights shine through. So imagine the allure of someone who showers you with affection, but then their true colors emerge. Self-centeredness, lack of empathy, and an insatiable need for admiration. Could this be narcissistic personality disorder? Dr. Zuckerman guides us through manipulative tactics, unveiling emotional turmoil, discover stages from intense beginnings to isolation, and how survivors find healing through exit strategies and support networks. So join us now for profound insights into narcissistic relationships and the path to recovery. Enjoy. Well, today, or this afternoon, or this evening, it really depends on what side of the world you are sitting in right now. We have an amazing guest for you today. We have the lovely Dr. Jaime Zuckerman. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I can't wait to deep dive into this topic. But before we do, we always love to ask our guests to share this story. So, Jaime, what inspired you to do what you do today?
So I've always been fascinated by the brain ever since I can remember how it worked and why it worked and just how amazing it is. And so I knew I wanted to do something that had to do with the brain. And that's kind of how it evolved. Initially, it was more kind of neuropsych stuff, and then it translated into therapy, but more kind of how the brain worked in terms of our behaviors. And then it just kind of flowed from there. I started seeing people mostly with actually neurological diseases because I worked in a neurology practice. So I was still kind of part of that brain stuff, right? And then after that, I went into practice for myself and slowly started seeing these patterns of behaviors in these toxic relationships, and kind of it turned into that. And then here we are.
And so when you're talking about these behaviors, what specifically are you talking about?
Just generally speaking, I think it's fascinating how we develop patterns of behavior over time and how we kind of navigate our world based on that narrative, even if it's not healthy or effective or helpful, and that we really have so much control over certain, obviously not everything in our life, but when you break it down to kind of in the moment, we very much have choices that we can make in any given moment, and that's defined by our behaviors. And so I think it's very cool that we can always figure out what we can control in any given moment. And I think it gives people, I would say, kind of less hopelessness because they feel that they have this control over what they do and their responses.
You mentioned stories before. How do we, because I know we all get caught up in our stories, and I think it would take a level of consciousness, right, to be, you're talking about choice here, because quite often, or, from my understanding, we're operating at unconscious programs all the time. So what's the trick to become more conscious so that we do have a choice on changing our stories?
Yeah, I love that question. So, like you said, it involves us being aware, right? And until we become kind of experts in making healthier choices so that then it can go back onto automatic pilot, or it can kind of go, but to switch it in the moment, you have to be aware. So what I like to do with people is first I help them identify like what their patterns even are, because we can't address them if we don't even know what they are. And oftentimes people will, realize that they're doing things they didn't even realize they were doing. And then once you have that awareness, you can start to acknowledge when you do it. But the ones that are kind of more, as you say, kind of unconscious and in this kind of automatic response that we have, one of the things I work with patients on is helping them stay present in the moment and be very mindfully aware of their surroundings, using all their senses, certain grounding techniques to bring them into the present moment so that they realize that there is that pause. And I always say the power is in the pause. So they can realize that they're in that pause and in that moment make a healthier decision, whatever that may be. It doesn't have to be anything significant. It could be, choosing to eat fruit instead of candy for breakfast, right? Something like that. But really get them to slow down, being grounded in the moment to make that decision.
When you said that, I just got a picture of myself sometimes when I get stressed without even acknowledging my stress, right? I end up in the pantry and staying in the pantry for no reason. And it wasn't until my business partner said, do you realize how often you go into the pantry? And I was like, no. So I needed the feedback because I wasn't even aware of it. And the moment he gave me that feedback, I became consciously aware that I was doing that. So I think feedback is also really important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's, and the other thing too, to keep in mind is, and this is what I see more so in relationships, but when you shift that pattern, right, for yourself, then you start to feel more in control, right? And then you start to feel better about yourself because then you're making healthier choices. And if you catch yourself doing it again, you can kind of identify what led you there. It was before it was so quick. When you're changing patterns in relationships, there's another person in there. And so when you start to act differently or make different choices, you throw the other person off balance. And it becomes a little bit trickier when it involves other people. But for us, ourselves, when we make these choices, it just gives us, it gives us not just a sense of control, but structure, stability. It gives us motivation to want to keep doing it again because we see results from whatever the positive changes that we made.
So with working with your clients, and I mean, there's lots of people in relationships. So how would you go about it when it involves another person? Because I know for me, it's always been, we've had a conversation and give me the feedback. So if this program keeps, a behavior, let's say, that keeps coming up that I'm not consciously aware of, please let me know. Let me know when I do it so that I can start acknowledging it and seeing when specifically I'm doing it. Is that something you, and it's not an easy thing to do, right? To give feedback.
No, because some people, they say they may want that feedback, but when it happens in the moment, when they're really stressed out, or it makes them feel vulnerable, or it makes them feel agitated or picked on, or whatever the case may be. So I think, we have to know our audience, right? And know how we tell them that they're doing it again. Sometimes I do this thing with people if they get, offended or they feel bad about themselves. I have them come up with a word that's totally irrelevant to the situation, like, coffee. And so that word represents, oh, I'm doing it again, without actually saying you're doing it again. And I think that helps too. The other thing, though, that's interesting that happens is when, even if the other person is actively involved in helping you, let's say, not go to the pantry anymore, right? And somebody's saying, oh, you're doing it again, and you're fine with that. This is going to be a weird one to use an example on, but let's just say, this is a stretch, but let's just say that, when you would go into the pantry, one of the things you would do is you would cook these lavish meals, let's say in the middle of the night, because that's just what you did. And because your partner now is stopping you from doing that, which is a good thing, so you're not eating in the middle of the night, the other thing that starts to happen, again, this is a weird example, but the other thing that starts to happen is now there's no meals cooked for the week. So now, right, as a result of changing your behavior, you've changed the dynamic within your relationship. Now that may seem benign, but let's say the other person just wasn't the person that cooked. And so now what? And so maybe there's an argument about who's going to cook, or there's roles are now shifting, and the other person didn't sign up for that. And so everything's really kind of intertwined and interconnected. So when somebody starts, let's say, I work with them on people pleasing, and they stop people pleasing, it may look good on the surface, but in the end, you're really kind of redoing dynamics that have been in place for a really long time.
I've experienced that. Where I've made a conscious effort of really working on my boundaries, because, and I'm a recovering people pleaser, so I have not recovering. I'm getting there, but it's true. It does change the dynamics, because then you don't realize that all of a sudden, like, why are you behaving this way? Because you've always said yes, or you've always,
what's wrong? Why are you being rude or whatever? Yeah.
So it's true.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And what they'll do, either consciously or not consciously, it depends. They may do things like, why are you being so rude? Like, why are you doing this? I need your help. You've always helped me, in an effort to push you back to your original positioning. Right. And again, sometimes it's not malicious, but sometimes it is. And sometimes they're unaware of it and you have to bring it to their attention. And sometimes relationships just don't work when don't work anymore. Friendships, romantic relationships, business associates, sometimes it just doesn't work anymore when one people starts to shift those boundaries.
So true. And so before we came on the show, we were talking about a topic that we have not spoken about on this show for over 7 years that we've been doing the show, which is narcissistic personality disorder. So I'd really love to unpack that, because I'm sure our audience would love to learn more about it or understand it. So what is it specifically?
So, it's in the last, I'd say 4 or 5 years, it's become this big buzzword, especially on social media. But, it's also led to a lot of confusion between, narcissistic traits or narcissism versus narcissistic personality disorder. So narcissistic personality disorder is a pervasive style of personality, a pervasive way to interact with the world, meaning it's not just in certain situations. It is how this person interacts with the world around them at all times. With narcissistic personality disorder, one of the key elements of that is a lack of empathy. And I'll talk about kind of what types of behaviors lead to that, but lack of empathy, lack of accountability for the impact that their behaviors have on others, a sense of entitlement or grandiosity with very little work or effort to get them to the level that they think they should be at, or that they think that they're deserving of. Things like, very controlling of others, very manipulative of situations so that they can get control and power. It's very much about gaining control and power. And it's, it is, I'm not going to say it can be, it is extremely toxic and can be very dangerous to be in a relationship with somebody who has that personality, for a whole host of reasons.
And are these individuals aware? Because I've heard people say, I've got a narcissistic mother. And I'm like, how do you know that? Like, what specifically? And I guess the one of the things they did say, they were manipulative in their approach. So thank you for explaining that. So do the actual individual know themselves that they have this behavior that plays out? Because the behavior is really not the person, is it? The behavior is really, or is it in this case the actual person?
So they're aware that they are. So it's kind of like they don't present for treatment. So it's not like they're coming into therapy saying, I have narcissistic personality disorder, or they're coming in because they don't know what's wrong. And the therapist says you have narcissistic personality disorder and they continue for treatment. They don't go to treatment. I actually don't even recommend it for couples therapy. You never go to couples therapy with a narcissist. They never present for treatment. Nothing's wrong. It's everybody else's fault. And they don't think they have a problem. So if you give them a diagnosis, they're going to naturally think that doesn't fit them because they're above a label. That's not them. If people have a problem with them, it's their issue, not the person themselves. So yes, they are aware. If they are told that they are harming people, there is no empathy. They don't care. They will do whatever they need to do to get whatever it is they need to get in a particular situation. And so that's one of the hardest things for survivors of narcissistic abuse to kind of really sit with, is this idea that, they knew what they were doing. And the reason why I say they know what they're doing, and this isn't just my opinion, but it's because, especially with covert narcissism, so the abuse that you see behind closed doors, These are people who will present as charming, philanthropic, gregarious, like, just very funny, life of the party, couldn't hurt a fly, just funny. Everyone wants to be near them. And then as soon as they get home, the abuse starts. Or as soon as their partner hangs up the phone with their family member, the abuse starts. Or they select birthdays, anniversaries, graduations, important events to start trouble. They know exactly what they're doing. And so, because of the way they select when and how they exhibit those behaviors, the difference between that, let's say somebody who grew up in an environment where they were around toxic patterns, and so naturally we repeat what we see, we model what we see. And so I've had a lot of people that I would see that have patterns on the surface that look narcissistic, but when brought to their attention and their awareness of how those behaviors come off either onto me or to other people, and they see that it's not healthy and that it's hurting others, they want to change it. Somebody with narcissistic personality disorder, that's not something that would cross their mind. That's not what they intend to ever do.
So what do you do so if you find yourself in a relationship, and for our audience, if they are in that type of relationship, whether it's family or personal, what do you do?
Well, so if you're in, it's tricky. It depends on who the relationship is with. It depends on if there's children, if you're married, if you're living together, if you have the flexibility or the luxury of finding a different job, if it's somebody that you work with. But, ideally, the longer you stay in a narcissistic abusive relationship, the worse it gets. The worse it gets, that's what's going to happen. So ideally, you want to leave. They're not going to change. And so it becomes a matter of, if you want to stay in the relationship, how best can you stay in it and protect yourself emotionally and physically, sexually, financially, all of the above. Or how can we put together a plan to have you exit the relationship safely? Because it really is the only type of breakup that requires an actual exit plan from numerous domains. And particularly when there's children involved, because family courts really do not do a lovely job of protecting the abused in a coercive abusive relationship, because it's very nuanced, it's very manipulated, it's very controlled, so it's hard to see the impact of it. So with family members, it's difficult. It's boundaries. It's very significant boundaries, but it depends on the actual relationship, whether it's something, boundaries meaning you cut them out completely, boundaries meaning you only contact them certain times, you don't answer when they call, you kind of dictate when you want to interact with them. But really it has to do with boundaries if you can't get out.
Is this something that you are born with, or is this a conditioning that takes place in your imprinting phase depending on the environment? Because, when we look at attachment styles, for example, abandonment or anxious and attachment, all these different styles, that obviously it had an impact on, what environment we were in our imprinting phase. So
Sure.
Is that the same thing with narcissism?
Sure. So there's research that says that, if you look at the brain differences between a narcissist and someone with narcissistic personality disorder, non-narcissist, you'll see differences, but whether those differences are, from birth or, our brains are malleable and it kind of molds over time with our experiences. But the interesting thing about narcissistic personality disorder is, if you have, let's say, a narcissistic parent or two narcissistic parents, it doesn't mean that you are then going to develop narcissistic personality disorder. From a pattern development perspective, growing up and being around this, really it's the result of inconsistent parenting, that kind of hot, cold, never knowing what you're going to get, walking on eggshells, or the golden child, where you can do no wrong in your parents' eyes. There's no consequences to your actions, therefore rules don't apply to you, laws don't apply to you, and you grow up thinking that this is how everybody is going to treat you. So there's that end of it as well. There could be parents that are extremely overbearing, over controlling, very nitpicky to the point where the child feels they can't breathe or make their own decisions. So it really depends on kind of one, the experiences, and two, kind of what the child does with them. Whether it's going to develop into, healthy patterns, dependency, people pleasing, narcissism, affect instability. It really just depends on the actual person themselves.
And do they, because, well, it depends on who you listen to and what research you look at. Where they quite often they'll say, oh, you attract the opposite. You attract what you must learn. So if you're a people pleaser, will you attract like a narcissistic individual? Does it work in that sort of same way? Or?
So normally for anything else, I would say yes, right? But with narcissistic personality disorder, it's a myth, big misconception that those with NPD only go for dependent, pleasing, even weak, or kind of, no background. It's actually not true. What ends up happening is narcissists are naturally drawn towards strong people, successful people, smart people, opinionated people. They want that limelight. It looks good for them to be with someone like that. Where we see the quote weak part come into play is after the years of abuse and literally stripping of that person's identity by a narcissist. Then we have, at the end of the relationship, somebody whose self-esteem, self-identity is just absolutely crushed. So I think what ends up happening is there may be somebody who's a people pleaser, let's say, in the beginning of the relationship, the narcissist is going to cater to whatever it is that they think that you want. Because in the beginning with a love bombing, we hear about love bombing, that love bombing stage in the beginning where they're going to act a certain way and kind of, it's a facade, it's a mask, right? It's not who they are, but they are very good at making you think that they are that person so that you feel like it's your soulmate. You connect. It's like a puzzle piece. Like, how could you fit so perfectly? And the reason is because they're assessing exactly what you need. So if you're a people pleaser, they're going to create such an environment that either looks like, you know what, you take care of everybody, I'm going to take care of you, right? To kind of appeal to that. Or they're going to say, you're such a caretaker. You're so good to me. I love you so much. I love when you, bring me dinner every night and it makes me feel so special. They're going to do what they need to do. And so I think in this particular case, I don't necessarily think it really matters, to be honest.
So I believe that every relationship's like that. I call that, you're in that conscious relationship and still until you become really comfortable with one another, and then you become unconscious in that relationship.
Yes.
And then they're actually saying all the things that you want to hear, basically, yes. Right? But then you're saying when the honeymoon is, period is over, what they do is they revert back to who they truly are.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. And at that point, what happens usually is the person is so, they have conditioned them so well with such strategy and such purpose that person starts to think like, wait, did I do something? Because it's so, when it first happens, it's so, people describe it as otherworldly, that first argument or that first fight that has nothing to do with anything. And it seems so, they just switch on you. And it's so bizarre feeling. It's like a surreal feeling. So they're so thrown off guard that they don't even think to themselves, okay, I'm out, right? They think like, God, what must I have done that's so upsetting to them for them to behave like, I've never seen them like this. And they slowly start to believe that these things are their fault. Which is why a lot of times you have these really strong people in these relationships and you have to say, well, why can't they just leave? Because it's not that easy, because they really make you believe that you can't, and that they've gaslit you, which we can talk about so much, that your perception of reality, you don't trust. And so you depend on them to kind of define your world around you because they've taught you not to trust yourself.
So how specifically do they gaslight you?
So things like in the beginning, it'll look like, your friend, let's say you're going out for dinner with your friends. so you know your friend Jamie, I know you're really close with her. I know she's been your best friend forever. But there's something about her I don't trust. I'm not quite sure what it is. Right. So they start to isolate you slowly. Are your parents always that controlling? Do you let them talk to you like that? And you're like, wait, are they controlling? I never, what? And then start to pull things out and kind of make it so that you see that. Or, it's something as mind numbing as, let's say that they told you they couldn't go out with you that night, right? Because they were sick, and your friend sees them out at the restaurant, and your friend takes a picture and sends it to you. And you show it to them and you say, you were out last night. I thought you were sick. And they said, that's not me. And you're like, wait, what? Yes, it is. No, it's not. And it's so bizarre that it's kind of like you start to doubt yourself and to say things like, you're crazy, or, you need to get your eyes checked, or why are you having people take pictures of me? What's wrong with you? Why are you stalking me? You have problems. And they switch it around so that before you know it, you're sitting there defending yourself about your quote stalking behaviors and your quote insecurities, when really it had nothing to do with that. So they're just very, very good at that, very skilled.
So if they sound very intelligent in what they do, and and they never admit that they have anything that is wrong with them. So are we saying that there's a lot of narcissistic individuals out there who are not being treated, who will continue to do what they're doing because they don't see that there is anything wrong with them?
Correct. Yeah. And so here's the thing that happens. And I get pushed back on this a lot, especially on social media, when I talk about this, how it's narcissist, it's so rare. It's so rare. Well, personality disorders in general, yeah, but oftentimes they don't present for treatment. So that's part of it. The other part is, of course it looks rare, because where are you getting your numbers from? There's no one's going for treatment. It's all secondhand. Of course it looks rare, but when you have people hearing these things and listening to podcasts like yours and hearing other survivors' stories, and it's a playbook. It is so specific. So for as unique as they may think they are, the behaviors and the strategies are so specific, and it's like a playbook. It's a blueprint. And when you hear it and you've been through that, it's like this light bulb goes off, and it's kind of like, oh my God, wait, that's what I've been dealing with all of these years. I thought I was crazy. And they will make you, it's crazy making. I think there are so many people out there that are walking around undiagnosed. Absolutely. I think that it's important that we educate people on the difference between somebody who's just a jerk and somebody who's a narcissist, or somebody who cheats on you but isn't a narcissist. There's all of that as well. Narcissistic personality is very specific, and it's not episodic. It's chronic, and it's all the time.
And is it a learned behavior? Because when you were talking with some of the traits, I know some people that have some of those traits, but not all of them. And I see that their parents are like that. So it's almost like a learnt trait to manipulate an outcome, let's say, so that works in their favor. But I wouldn't say they're narcissistic.
Right.
But so would you say that there's from like a scale from 1 to 10 that there is a variable that sits within the actual personality trait?
I think that yes and no. I think that we all have narcissistic tendencies, right? So you and I speaking right now in our field of expertise, our narcissistic traits are, let's say, higher, right? But when we get off this call, I'm not going to talk like this to my child's pediatrician about I don't know, something that they have, because I know nothing about it. I'm going to get myself back in check, because there's the etiquette, the proper interaction style. There's some people who are more confident than others that may come off that way. The key difference is, you're talking about people that are manipulative or, to get their way. The key difference between that and someone who has narcissistic personality disorder is the degree to which they feel empathy the degree to which, once they're aware of their behaviors, how much accountability they take for it. So if I manipulate somebody because I really want something and I like just go after it, and I really just like ran someone over to get it, and I got it, and now I'm like, oh God, I feel so guilty for what I did. A narcissist isn't going to feel that way. So just because somebody is a manipulative to get what they want, you have to look at, are they accountable for it? Do they know what they did? And if they know what they did, do they have empathy? Is there remorse? Is it something they'd be willing to change if they know how much it hurt the other person? So there's all those variables at play. I think it has to do with the level of awareness. I take it back. The level of willingness to change once you have the awareness that you're harming other people.
So a lack of empathy, would that have, is that to do with the brain, or is that part of the personality trait?
So there's research for both. Research will show that there's different parts of the brain that light up differently for people that are, let's say, who have antisocial personality disorder, which is, sociopathic. I think it comes from, I look at it more from the standpoint of kind of patterns of development, that there were either no consequences to their actions, they never got in trouble, that, their parents bailed them out all the time from whatever situation they were in, even if it was out of love, right? Even if they didn't mean it in any negative way, but nonetheless, that was the consequence of it. I think it really is, you're kind of conditioned into that, or you just block it out. You just genuinely don't care if you harm other people, either because caring about other people got you in trouble or hurt growing up. So you learn to kind of block that out because emotions were dangerous, feeling emotions were dangerous. And you kind of took that and it continued into adulthood, even when it didn't work anymore.
Wow. And so people that got narcissistic personality disorder, you don't really work with them. You work with the partners or the recipient. And so once they acknowledge, wow, I'm in that type of relationship, what happens then? What kind of work do you do with them then?
So I would say, it's, when I say this, I don't mean it like it's a cool thing, but one of the most rewarding things, I think, working with patients who are either in family dynamics or intimate relationships, when they have that aha moment of, oh my God, like this is it. Like I could never figure out what this is. This is it. This is what's going on. The great thing about that is that once they see it and they see the blueprint, you can't ever unsee it, which also means you are you're still going to be affected because there's still so much trauma with this, even post breakup, post separation abuse. But at that point, there is a part of them that knows now that it's going to be different, that they're on the other side of it. And even though it's going to be a struggle, they can't unsee it. They will not be blindsided anymore. They understand the behaviors. So once you gain that understanding, there is this sense of empowerment that comes with it. That, okay, I know what's going on now. I can predict now on my birthday, I'm going to be proactive and block their number so that I don't have to deal with the phone calls, right? So you take a little bit more control, or that because it's not your night to have the kids, and let's say you are going on vacation with your new girlfriend, and your ex-wife, who is a narcissist, knows you're going on vacation. That's going to be the time where, one of the kids gets sick, or there's a flat tire, something's going to happen. So you learn not to let them know that. Maybe you tell your parents, so that at least somebody knows you're away, right? So those types of things to help you gain control. And so when I have people realize that that's kind of where they're at, that's where we kind of start the work of, are you working to learn how to stay in this? Are you working to leave? Majority of people say they're working to leave. And so I help them, formulate a plan, as long as that may take, how to set boundaries, what the result of those boundaries are going to look like, teaching them to regulate their nervous system, because they have been experiencing such chronic trauma for so long that their nervous system is completely dysregulated. So breathing and sitting with the discomfort, learning grounding techniques, and kind of welcoming that hypervigilance and learning to, sit with it rather than escalate. It's all of these things, teaching them, how their bodies are physically are wrapped up in this, helping them figure out who they are. Because I will have people come out of these relationships and say, I don't even know what kind of music I like. I don't know what kind of clothes I like to wear, because their identity has been given to them. It was stripped and then it was given to them. And so they have this narrative they've been following for so long. They don't know who they are without that toxic person, which is also very upsetting. If there's kids involved, it's even more upsetting to realize that, they were and are incapable of ever being the type of spouse, parent you hoped you had. And there's a lot of mourning that takes place.
Yeah, wow. Because I think that in relationships too, you tend to hang on to the potential of what that human being can be.
Oh
Because,
yeah. And they'll dangle that for you. Every so often they'll go back to that love bombing stage just enough to keep you roped in.
So you were saying that there's really two options. They stay in the relationship, and I'd love to really unpack that. How do you do that? Knowing now that you're with someone that's got a narcissistic personality disorder, or leave. And even that could be scary, because if they're all about control, I can't imagine what would happen for them when their partner goes, well, I'm leaving you. That's how right. That plays out as well. So I'd love to hear about the both scenarios.
Yeah. So I'll start with the leaving. So we know from research in domestic violence that the most dangerous time for the person leaving is when they're leaving. That's the highest time for violence, and physical violence. So you really need to, that's where that plan comes in. You must have a safety plan. You must use your resources. There's so many things that go into it, because you're absolutely right. It is terrifying to leave. And, from a narcissist perspective, you're an object. You're not a person with feelings and emotions and opinions and needs. You're an object. You're their object. So if you leave, you are rejecting them. And anytime a narcissist feels rejected or abandoned, you're going to get that narcissistic rage. And that's when it becomes scary. And so you really need to make sure that you have a safety plan in place. You need to make sure that you have money, because chances are, even if you put aside a little bit every week for 3 years, because they will financially abuse you. They will make sure that, nothing's in your name, or that you don't know your bank accounts, or there's money that you don't even know where it is. They just control all of that. So there's that aspect of it. And the other thing too is it takes people on average 7 tries, I think it is, to actually leave a relationship. And so I tell people that if you leave and come back, don't look at it as a failure. Look at it as a necessary step to the next time when you finally leave and stay for good. And someone with narcissistic personality they won't let you leave easily. There's a couple of things could happen. They could, be violent, right? Chances are they will smear your character. They will say things about you that are untrue. You're crazy, you're an addict, you're abusive, you're whatever. Try to get you fired from your job. They will do everything they can because you left. You rejected them. No awareness or accountability for why that happens. And they'll do everything they can to ensure that they punish you. One of the things that will happen, and this is very common, is, narcissists, when it comes to infidelity, it's very common. And it's not just one person, it's usually multiple people. They always have somebody waiting, or, whenever they want to, because it gives them that control and that supply. Chances are they will position themselves in such a way to be with somebody pretty darn soon after, and blast pictures all over social media or whatever, making them look so loving and adoring, so that people say, well, look how great they are. Why would she leave, or why would he leave? Something must be wrong with them. And it's all on purpose. So leaving is very difficult for its own reasons. Staying, usually what happens is people that aren't ready to leave yet take the route of, no, I want to figure out how to stay. And there's still some hope that maybe the person's going to change. And maybe when they threaten to leave, the person says, no, let's go to couples therapy. I promise I'm going to change. And that works for maybe a little bit, but then it doesn't, and they never intended it to. And I can tell you that in my experience working with people whose goal it is to stay, one of two things happens. Either that goal doesn't last very long and they realize that they need to leave for the sake of their safety, their children's safety, or unfortunately they stop coming, because I think there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of guilt in staying with somebody who's abusive, not because you're making it's very hard, it's so intertwined, it's so tricky to get out of. And that's why people, when they say, well, why can't they leave, there's so many reasons. And so I really try to make people feel as comfortable as I can with no judgment, and really kind of walk them through that to help them get to that place. But I think sometimes people that aren't ready to leave sometimes aren't ready to do the work, and that's okay. You have to be ready to do this. And if you're not sometimes and you try, it can actually backfire. So you really want to make sure that you're ready.
So when you're talking about that, doing the work, you're talking about even as simple as, because I'm sure there's people that's going to be watching this or listening to this interview and probably find that they're in that predicament themselves, where they're in a narcissistic relationship and not ready to leave. But there are some things that they can do and put into place, right? So you were talking about setting boundaries. But are you saying that even by setting boundaries, that could rock the boat as well? Or
for sure. Yeah, for sure. When you set boundaries with a narcissist, they don't then, like a non-narcissist, say, okay, listen, we can't control anyone's behavior, and boundaries are for us, right? To let people know what we're willing to tolerate and not tolerate. And that's what the other person reads. With a narcissist, you telling them what you're willing to tolerate and not, they don't care. That's irrelevant to them. So they'll just figure out other creative ways to get their needs met, whether it's by, buying you gifts, whether it's by raging, whether it's by locking you out of the house, whether it's, picking the kids up and leaving and not coming back for a week and not telling you where they went. I mean, there's so many different things that I've seen and things that they'll do. So setting boundaries, there's that part that it's going to come with some sort of comeback in some way.
It's so I find it so fascinating, because they're attracted to you because you're a strong individual.
Yes.
You're independent.
They enjoy watching them. They enjoy watching you break down.
But then
they get pleasure
but then
from
if
that.
You were to go back to becoming that person, because you were saying once you see, it's hard to unsee, right? So then if you're going back to that person that once, oh gosh, I now know that I've allowed this to happen. I'm just playing this out, right? I've allowed this to happen. So I'm going to put some boundaries in place, and I'm ready with whatever comes my way. Does that not flip their script kind of thing when you are back to who you were when they first met you?
Yeah, that's actually a really great question. No one's ever asked me that. Let me figure out how I want to phrase that. So once a narcissist has completely just stripped you of your identity, your self, all of that stuff. And then you gain that strength by figuring out their patterns. In the narcissist's mind, you're quote damaged. Like, there is no returning you to wherever you used to be. They look at you as bad. You're not strong. You're bad. You're not, confident. You're disrespectful. So it never goes back to that. They view your boundaries as an inconvenience.
Right. So that they will never see you the way that they first saw you, ever.
No, because the way they saw you in the beginning is this idealized version of what they want and what they see you as. And as soon as you breathe wrong, blink wrong, don't text them back within the 5-minute time that they feel is appropriate, that's it. You're bad. And so that's why that eventually always happens, because it's set up that way. It's always set up that way for the person to be idealized and then fail. You have failed to meet my expectations.
So there is no hope in fixing up a narcissistic relationship. Really, what you're saying is that are there any good stories where people actually, it does work out and the narcissistic individual? No. Okay.
I hate, and well, let me give a small caveat for that. So, as a psychologist, my job is to help people. My job is to help people live fulfilled lives and live the best that they can and help them. And so for me to say that takes a lot, right? I'm not saying that lightly. It takes a lot for me to say that. That's number one. Number two, are there people that have narcissistic personality disorder that will say that they are, former narcissists, that they are healed, that they are self-aware? You call that self-aware narcissists? Maybe. But here's what this is my personal opinion. I'm sure there's people that will disagree with me on this. I think when they say, quote, self-aware narcissists, two things are happening. One, they didn't meet diagnostic criteria to begin with, but maybe they had a lot of narcissistic patterns and traits they picked up from growing up, but they realized how unhealthy it was and how much they were harming people, and they wanted to change it, which by definition would not be narcissistic personality disorder. Or they're saying they're self-aware and helping people because it's just another way to manipulate and get supply. So I think that's probably what we see. Could I be wrong? Yeah, of course. I have not personally seen a relationship with someone who has narcissistic personality disorder ever work in a healthy way, ever.
So I'm thinking, I do a lot of corporate work, and in large corporations, a lot of the times they get you to do psychological assessment tools. Like where you do an assessment, they have these tools where they kind of like assess. So is there anything like that? Because I'm just saying, I wonder how that plays out. Is this only in relationships, or does this play out in all environments?
So with the narcissistic personality disorder, because it's a personality disorder, it's pervasive. It's in all domains of their life. It's how they interact with everybody in their life, from a waiter to the electrician that comes to their house, to their spouse, to their child. The difference is they will act however they need to act in a particular situation to get what it is that they want at any given time. So they may look really lovely outside, but they're not. But that doesn't mean they're just like that with you. They're also putting on an act of being lovely with the neighbor. So it's always kind of on, if so to speak. If they're just a jerk with you, then it's not a personality disorder. It's toxic dynamics between those two.
So there's no way, because obviously they don't put themselves forward for any help because they don't think there's anything wrong with them. Right. But is there anything like, so going back to working corporations where a lot of the executives, they go and get these psychological assessments. Does it ever show up in anything like that?
So I don't know the names. You would know much better than I know with some of the corporate assessments that are given, there's certain indicators or characteristics or personality styles that, it'll show up higher for than others. You see this in forensic evaluations. It will show up for custody evaluations or for any type of court case. Anything involving, legal issues, you'll very, very often seen in custody situations. Assessments for if somebody is on trial for murder. So, you may have a psychologist consultant come in and do the assessment. So you'll see it come up in those on certain indicators for sure.
Wow. And then when it comes up in those kinds of situations, are they then more open to do the work if they want? No.
The only way they would do the work is if it in some way benefits them, like shortens their sentence or gets them to have to pay less alimony or less child support or less custody, whatever the case may be. But no, otherwise, no.
This is fascinating. And I'm really curious, what made you deep dive into this specific topic?
Yeah. So two things. One, when I started working in private practice, and I started seeing mostly women for anxiety and depression, there was there was this, not often, but enough where it became noticeable to me, this pattern of relationships. And I had learned, and I think, most psychologists will say this too, at least I don't know if it's different now in training, but when I went to grad school, we learned all about borderline personality disorder. Narcissistic personality disorder was, quote, so rare. And we just learned about it as it's somebody who's really full of themselves, really kind of just entitled and grandiose. But no one ever talked about it in terms of what it looks like in an actual day-to-day relationship. And I started hearing these patterns. And then when the pandemic hit, because people were home and not able to leave or go anywhere, you had this massive increase in domestic violence rates. You had this massive increase in child abuse rates. And no one was reporting it anymore because the children weren't at school, right? And so people weren't going to work. People were losing jobs. Substance abuse went up. So it was just a really bad situation all around. And people were turning to social media, talking about their stories. And it just started kind of clicking for people. But I had been, obviously doing the work a while before that, but people were way less educated about what it was. And so when I would tell them what it was like this, this light bulb moment. And I realized there were very few people that maybe they specialize in it, but I didn't know about them. There were very few people at the time that I knew that were experts in this, who were very good and kind of, in my mind, the kind of gurus of this work. And so through social media, I just kind of started talking about it more and educating people more because, it's almost like preventative medicine. You help them get out of it. Yes, that's where I'm at with people when I work with them. But my goal was to educate people enough who weren't patients of mine what the signs are, the red flags are of love bombing and all that stuff, so that you don't get into it in the first place. Because any of us can get into it. It doesn't matter how smart you are. It doesn't matter how psychologically savvy you are. It doesn't matter. Everyone's at risk. So, that's kind of really where it started. And I've just had so many people that the stories they tell me, it's like, just when you think you've heard the worst, it's like it's like really unfathomable. And so in addition to that, ironically, my best friend was going through a divorce, and thankfully now it's divorced, was going through a divorce with a narcissist. And I had a front row seat to all of it. And it was absolutely horrific. So I was like, I can't have people in these situations. It just was like, it's heartbreaking. So that's kind of where it came from.
And do you think that, because you were saying it's kind of like a buzzword, a lot more people are talking about it,
Yeah.
is because people now can put a name to what is taking place. And so a lot more people have been coming forward with their stories. The ones that are coming forward with their stories, obviously, they're the ones that have left the narcissistic relationship. Is that correct?
Sometimes they're still in it, trying to get out of it. And they're asking for help on how to do that. I think the biggest thing is that there is a distinct difference between when people talk about, let's say, their spouse who's a narcissist versus somebody who's talking about their spouse that they think is a narcissist but isn't. The details are so drastically different. And it's not to minimize what the other person's going through, because they're still in abusive situations that are non-narcissistic, which look very different than narcissistic abuse. And I think that, we have to be careful how we use the word, because we don't want someone who's a survivor of narcissistic abuse for their experience to be minimized by the incorrect usage of the word. And listen, the other thing I get a lot too, and I think it's tough for me as a psychologist, is that, people will say, you're stigmatizing mental illness. You're stigmatizing people with narcissistic abuse. And I understand where they're coming from. However, I'm really just reporting behaviors, right? Like I haven't said, I'm really just reporting what they do. And it's kind of like, it sounds that bad because it is that bad. And they'll say, well, they're wounded too. And I get that a lot. And I agree, they're wounded. But you know what? A lot of us are wounded, but we don't act
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah, true.
Right.
And that did cross my mind.
A lot of us are wounded, but we don't act that way. And I'm sure they're wounded. I get that. But I can't say to my female patient in front of me who's telling me that their spouse rapes them repeatedly and has turned their children against them and has completely ruined their job, their career, that, well, I know, but they're wounded. I mean, I'm not going to say that. And so it starts to sound ridiculous. But again, I understand where people are coming from with that. And it's a very delicate line. That's why I say it's really not easy for me to say that. But I worry that if we cater to that during a time when someone's trying to get out of the relationship, they're going to feel compelled to want to help and stay and fix that person and give them hope when it's not there.
And that's so true, right? I think that's human nature. We want to help others.
Of course.
Especially if we know that they're wounded. And this is where we just allow things to take place because we want to help them. And that's really interesting. But I do hear that word being bantered around, like she's so narcissistic or he's so narcissistic a lot.
Yeah.
But never thinking about the actual person that's going through it, where we're not really understanding the meaning of the word.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah. I mean, somebody could be selfish, but just because, they are so filled with anxiety and worry that they're not paying attention to the details of anyone else's life. So they appear like they don't care and that they're just in it for themselves when really their head's swimming with anxiety, right? If they knew that that was the impact they were giving off on people, they'd be devastated. That's the difference.
And I guess too, just the way that you're speaking, I'm understanding that there must be layers. So let's say that somebody's riddled with anxiety and has panic attacks. I guess you'd have to work through that first or depression or something like that before they build the plan and build that muscle to start building those boundaries, or is it the other way around?
I think it depends on the person, but one of the things that I will have people do, if let's say that they're so depressed or so anxious that cognitively they're not able to process information, then I would regulate, their nervous system first. We would work on that, all of that stuff, just to get them present so they can even attend to the information that's coming in. Otherwise, there's no point. And then I would maybe say something along the lines of like, how do you feel people are responding to you? And take it from that way. And, they'll say people saying I'm selfish and I'm not. And I say, well, what do you think you're giving? I kind of just give it to them to kind of figure out and come to on their own. And I kind of guide them with that. And when they realize like, oh my God, is that how I'm coming off? Well, I don't want that. Then that kind of motivates them to, in that moment, give them that pause. It's like motivating enough because they have empathy. They don't want to harm the other person. They don't want to hurt them. They don't want to come off as selfish.
So, and I'm conscious of time, and I'm conscious of your time. I respect all of your time. Just one last question is: how do you help somebody regulate what they're experiencing?
So I first let them know it's not their fault. Period. It's not their fault. And the self-blame, the guilt, the shame that they feel have been manufactured for them for so long as a method of keeping them stuck. That hypervigilance that they feel, that constant on edge feeling, walking on eggshells, like it's like a light switch. It's like there's no dimmer. It's like it's just on. Helping them understand that the reason why they are responding to things like that, the reason why their heart's racing, why their blood pressure is high, why they're getting headaches, why they're not sleeping, why they feel frazzled, confused, foggy all the time, is because your body, appropriately so, has been living in a state of, I'm in danger. I need to protect myself at all times, because it had to. And so you've been living in this fight or flight mode for years, sometimes decades. Your body doesn't know any different. And so when you remove the trigger, so you remove the scary thing, right? Or the threat, your brain is still responding, your body is still responding as if you still are in danger. And so you have to really kind of work with them to rework their breathing, right? And kind of rework their sleep hygiene, what they eat, what they do with their anxiety when it comes up for them, and things like that. And explain to them that it's a normal response to your body doing what it was supposed to be doing.
Thank you for that. Look, this is such a fascinating topic, and I'm sure we
Yeah.
can go on for a couple of hours, but I am conscious of your time. So the way that we love
That's
to
okay.
wrap up the show, I think we'll have to get you to come back. It'll be interesting to see what our
Sure.
audience, I'm sure they're going to be reaching out. I'm sure it'll be just interesting what they have to say. So the way that we love to wrap up the show, Jamie, is to always ask our guests to leave 3 shiny golden nuggets. So what 3 shiny golden nuggets would you like to leave for our audience today?
Yeah. So for those of you who this resonated with, or who are going through this in any capacity, I already said this one, but the first thing, it is not your fault. It is not your fault. Make sure that you find some sort of support network. It doesn't have to be a friend or a family member. It could be a therapist that is well versed in narcissistic personality disorder. It could be your accountant to help you figure out how you're going to set money aside. It could be your primary care doctor going and, having them run your labs and figure out, why everything is so out of whack. Just whatever you can to feel good, to give you a sense of control and some sort of plan. That's number one. Number two, you want to get in therapy. You want to get in therapy with somebody who understands the nuances of this behavior, because a lot of the times the way we go about treating anxiety, depression, or treating, somebody's in an abusive relationship, but it's not narcissistic, we would handle that very differently than somebody who's in a narcissistic abusive relationship. So make sure you go online, look up, people in your area, ask them questions. Don't be afraid to ask the questions. That's the other major thing. And the other piece of it too, and this kind of just merges them all together, is that when you're in these relationships, a narcissist will do a very good job of trying to isolate you. So I really encourage people to seek out support within their families of the people they've been isolated from, because I promise you 99% of the time, and there's always 1% where it's not going to happen, they are nervous, concerned. They're going to be relieved that you reached out to them. Find somebody who you're most comfortable with. Maybe it's, the person at the grocery store that you see every day. It doesn't have to be a family member, but find somebody that you feel you're able to be vulnerable with, just so that you can feel what it's like to have a connection outside of this bubble that you have been in for so unbelievably long. And that's where the boundaries come in place and things like that. So that's what I would say.
Thank you so much. They're amazing. And where's the best place? Where do you hang out the most? Where's the best place for our audience to find you?
I post a lot on Instagram, Dr. Z Psychologist, and on TikTok, same Dr. Z Psychologist. My website, I have a bunch of resources on there, articles, books, and other websites. And that's drjamiezuckerman.com. I have workshops on there. And yeah, that's where you can find me.
Amazing. We'll have all of those in the show notes. I can't thank you enough for coming on the show.
Oh, this was great.
Such
Thank
a
you.
fascinating topic. And thank you for your time and energy. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.